Yep.
Today's guest is Joel Hammon, founding board member of Liberated Learners, a global network of self-directed learning centers, as well as the author of the Teacher Liberation Handbook. In 2010, Joel co-founded the Learning Cooperatives, a group of three self-directed education centers, and has worked as a staff member at Princeton Learning Cooperative in New Jersey since 2011. Joel taught for 11 years in both public and private conventional schools before leaving for the learning cooperatives. He holds a degree in secondary education from Miami University in Ohio with minors in history and political science. And he lives with his wife and two children outside of Philadelphia. Joel Hammond, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Hey, Kerry, great to be here.
It's so great to have you here. I am a huge fan, as you know, and others who listen to the podcast, of Liberated Learners, the global network of
Mhm.
self-directed learning centers that you and Ken Danford from North Star in Massachusetts co-founded in 2013. And just great to see the growth of that network and all that you do to support self-directed education around the world. And it's
Thank you.
just really lovely to have you on the show today to talk about your own journey from public school teacher to education entrepreneur to kind of micro school network founder.
Mhm.
And maybe we could start, Joel, with just sort of what made you interested in education to begin with and kind of began you on the path to be a conventional school teacher before shifting to alternative ed.
It's the family business. My dad, my dad was a teacher. A bunch of my aunts and uncles, and it's just sort of education. My mom was a secretary at the school that I went to up to eighth grade. So it was just sort of in the family. Um, and yeah, so I always, enjoyed school growing up. And I think there's actually a picture of me. I think I was voted most likely to be a teacher in the high school newspaper. And so there's a picture of me and Mr. Inselman, who was my social studies teacher there. And so, yeah, it was just always, I don't know, as early as I can remember, it was just like, yeah, I'm going to be a teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, went to school for that, went to college for that, and graduated in 2000 and sort of started the
Yeah.
teaching career there. Yeah.
Yeah. So you destined to be an educator from
Yeah.
the early days. And then what happened when you first began working in conventional classrooms? I know you worked in both public and private schools. What did you see in that experience? And maybe how was that real life experience different than what you expected, or was it?
Yeah, well, I would say, I'm sure the journey sounds really familiar to a lot of people who, follow your podcast and have taken this journey as well. Yeah, I was, you're pretty idealistic, in my approach to learning. I really felt that, schools and, the schools that I attended and public schools, um, were ultimately like a really large force for good, in the world, and it could really improve people's lives. And, how are we going to change the world? Well, we need to change education. We need to do that. And so, yeah, when I came out of college, really fortunately, the first job I had, real job, was at a private all girls Catholic school in Pennsylvania, and it was probably negligence on their part. They just were like, "You need to teach U.S. history and U.S. government, and go ahead." There was no curriculum. There's no real oversight. I was actually in another building away from the main building. They would just send kids over to me, and largely I could just do whatever I wanted to. So we, just tossed out the textbooks and just made it as much as relevant as I thought, to young people's lives, and just we did what I thought were interesting things. And so I think that was really important, because all of the things that mostly people complain about education were really non-existent. There was not big challenges around like behavior and things. There weren't like these curricular restraints. There weren't. It was just really free form, and just like you could be really creative and do things. And so even in that pretty idyllic, when I was a young person thinking about teaching, even in that context though, it started to dawn on me a couple years in. It's like, yeah, some of the kids really are interested in this and really feel like this is working for them. But, for a large part of them, even with all of the sort of regular things kind of tossed out, like, is this going to be on the test? Is this going to, they're just putting in their time. Um, and so, I did that for a couple of years, and then I had the chance to move into like a public school district, where I was in the area I was living at. And that's when it really started to dawn on me because and like I said in previous things, I don't want to make this too big of a, I don't want to over dramatize this. But ultimately, it felt like my job was essentially just making, kids who didn't want to be there do things they didn't want to do. And, certainly, that was, not why I went into teaching in the first place. I cared about young people and learning and being excited about the world. And, kind of what I saw, certainly by the end of my teaching career was just, I was teaching seniors my last year. I was in public school, and it's just like the excitement and interest in learning was, like had gone down every year that they'd been in school.
Mm,
And I just didn't feel like I wanted to be part of that anymore. So
mm.
yeah,
That's just so profound. You said you felt like you were making kids who didn't want to be there do things that they didn't want to do.
yeah,
And of course, for so many young people, that is what school is. It's sort of
yeah.
checking boxes and going through the motions, and not really having that passion for learning. So that was nagging at you. What happened next?
Well, a little bit earlier to that, so like I think maybe around 2007. So like in college, I had been kind of reading some like youth liberation sort of things, and had run across. I'm sure you've heard of Grace Llewellyn's Teenage
Of
Liberation Handbook.
course. Yes,
Um,
great manual for how to quit school and take education into your own hands.
yeah,
Highly
and
recommend that book.
yeah, and so I had read that and was interested, but more of like an intellectual exercise. It was like, oh yeah, this might be interesting. Like kids can just leave and just, make a life outside. But it didn't seem it wasn't a real possibility. I didn't consider, I was going into teaching. So this was, I was just like graduating from college, going into the workforce. Didn't really register with me. But probably around 2006, 2007. So I've been teaching for, 5, 6 years at that point, when it really started to dawn on me, like, yeah, I don't think I like this. I just happened to be reading it again, and picked up a line. There's just like one couple lines in there about this place called Pathfinder in Massachusetts, which eventually got renamed to North Star. And I was just like, oh, that's interesting. That's kind of the way they described it is like, yeah, that's sort of what I thought, the ideal way of working with young people was. And then was able to get in touch with Ken and North Star, and really start to understand more about, you know, uh, self-directed education, homeschool. I had zero, knowledge of this before, kind of running across that. And it was just like a revelation to me, just like, oh, right, like you could just do this. And there's this program that's been doing this for, I guess it was probably like 15 years at that point. North Star had been happening. Yeah, and so just wrote to Ken and was like, hey, what you're doing sounds like what I want to do, and and went up to visit, and there's a bunch of other things, but that was sort of the introduction to this, and decided pretty quickly is like, yeah, that's pretty much what I want to do. So, from 2007, I guess, when I was up at North Star, till PLC opened in 2010, Princeton Learning Cooperative, where I work full time, started in 2010. So, from that sort of intervening period, while I was still teaching, it was like, how do I make this thing happen? And yeah, that was a lot of the
Yeah.
focus. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, Ken Danford, the founder of North Star, Self-Directed Learning for Teens, has been on the podcast, and you
Mhm.
co-founded Liberated Learners with him. Very similar backgrounds that you both share, as public school teachers. I think both social studies, history teachers.
And both from Ohio.
And both from Ohio. What a small world.
Yeah.
And both kind of growing disillusioned with this kind of coercive approach to education,
Mhm.
and thinking about doing things differently. So you connected with Ken, and
Mhm.
then decided to open Princeton Learning Cooperative, which was that the first sort of North Star model um, second location or a different location, kind of modeled after North Star?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were the first
Yeah,
program that very consciously was like, yes, let's do this. Sort of hybrid, homeschooling was the legal basis
sure.
for that, but then having like an in-person community to support that was professionally staffed and that sort of thing. So yeah, so I think we were the sort of the next location. There's a number more now, but
Yeah, because then
yeah.
a few years later in 2013, you said, oh, let's create a network. If others are interested in kind of following this path, we can help them to do that and open up these learning centers in their own communities. And
Mhm.
maybe you could talk a little bit, Joel, about the way PLC, Princeton Learning Cooperative, works and sort of the North Star model more generally. You mentioned that, kind of running off of the homeschool foundation where students
Mhm.
are technically legally considered homeschoolers, but they can attend these programs, PLC and others, up to 4 days a week if they want, maybe five
Mhm.
in some locations.
Mhm.
But they could also do part-time and do all sorts of things. And they're typically for kind of tweens and teens, although I know I've interviewed some Liberated Learners
Yep.
founders who do extend down to elementary schools. But tell us a little
Yeah.
bit more about the kind of structure of the week and how it works for teens and tweens.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so when I'm talking to, potential new families who are interested in PLC, a lot of times we'll talk to them. It's just like it's like the blending of the two things. There's a lot of freedom and flexibility that comes from homeschooling law, which just, allows you to, in the United States, to opt out essentially of the public and private school system and just, have a lot more decision-making power about just what your life, your day-to-day, what your education looks like. But for a lot of the families that we're talking to, the idea of just independently homeschooling and just taking that all on them by themselves is daunting. Like I don't think, many people would do that. And so where PLC comes in and the learning cooperatives more generally is just it's like the most useful parts of being in a school, it blended with the freedom and flexibility of homeschooling law. So, what we provide is like a place to go, other kids to be around, a kind of weekly calendar of classes and activities and trips and one-on-one tutoring. Every kid that comes gets hooked up with a staff mentor that they meet with individually each week. And a lot of those mentoring meetings are, just helping young people and families like, make the most out of, the flexibility and the freedom they have. And crucially, I mean, there's a lot of school-ish things that go on, at PLC. Like you want to come and you want to learn algebra. It's like great, we can help you with that. The big difference is just that, everything we offer is voluntary and optional. So we make a lot of things possible, but leave it up to young people and families on how best to use that. And to us, we care deeply about respecting young people, and for us, making everything optional is one of the ways that we express that. Because everybody is different and needs different things, right? Ken probably I think I picked this up from Ken, but it functions more like a YMCA or a health club than like a school. So you know, you become a member. There's all this stuff you can do, but ultimately it's up to you, what you take advantage of, and people use it successfully in different ways. So like somebody training for a marathon is going to use the YMCA way differently than someone who's rehabbing knee surgery, and they're both fine, and good use of the YMCA. In fact, it would be quite weird if you showed up at the YMCA for a swim and there was a staff member at the door. Oh, hold on. Before you go swimming, you need to go lift weights for 45 minutes. Like, yeah, that would be kind of absurd. And so same thing at PLC, we have young people who come who are super academic and they dive into a million classes and they just sign up for everything. And then we have other young people who would look at that schedule and just be like, that's horrific. Like when when am I gonna have chance? They have other priorities. Like when am I have chance to like work on my drawings or like read that book I'm interested in or write that song I'm interested in, or just have a place to make friends and be part of a community or whatever else they have. And so it's leaving the endpoint open-ended and just working with young people and the families to support them wherever they're at and whatever the sort of goals are and helping them think through all that and then providing resources and everything to
So
support them. So,
so great. So great.
yeah.
One of the questions that I get a lot, you probably get a lot too, is
Mhm.
sort of what about outcomes? How do these unconventionally educated learners turn out when they
Mhm.
go on to adulthood, to college and or career? And of
Mhm.
course, you have data, right? You've been doing this since
Yeah.
2010. Ken at North Star has been doing it since the 1990s.
Mhm.
What do you find students go on to do after PLC?
Yeah, everything. Everything you can think of. So, yeah, I mean, so we're in the area that we're in, is pretty particular, it's Princeton, New Jersey and surrounding and areas. So, the kids at PLC end up doing largely what, the general population in the area do. So, it's a good chunk of the kids end up doing some sort of, college after PLC, whether that's, starting at a four-year university just directly as a freshman, or a lot of our kids, older kids, will start utilizing the community college system, sort of while they're in high school. And so we have a number of kids who might dabble in the community college while they're at PLC, and then maybe do a year or two, at the local community college before transferring to a four-year school. So that's a big chunk. I haven't looked at the percentages recently, but it's in what the area typical is for the area. So it's 70%, 80%, something like that. And then we have another group, smaller group of kids who will do something the year after, like maybe a travel or a gap year or some other sort of thing like that. We will have kids who just go directly into the workforce or maybe do like a trade kind of thing. One of my mentees very recently ended up going to cosmetology school, from PLC, and is, about ready to finish that up. So it just depends. And a number of our kids will go back to school, to be quite honest. So like conventional school, we actually had a lovely day here the other day. We had six of our alumni who were with us last year and decided to do like school or local public school or wherever it was. And they had a day off for one of the holidays and came back to visit, and it was great. And so like all the possibilities are open. And it's just to us, that's again, part of just respecting young people and their choices. Like, we want you to be where you want to be. And, if that's PLC, that's great. And if it's moving on to something else, like that's great too. It's like, how can we help?
I love that all the possibilities are open and you're just there as a guide and offering these classes and opportunities, a wide variety of possibilities of programs that
Yeah.
students can choose to engage with or not, or go off and do their own things as well. And having that mentoring and those sort of checkpoints, I think is really valuable.
Mhm.
If someone wanted, though, to go directly to a four-year college or university from
Mhm.
PLC, how would they be able to do that when you have sort of this unconventional approach to academics and
Mhm.
sort of how do they document what they're doing and convince an admissions committee that they're ready for admission?
Yeah. So it's, not just particular to PLC. So, there's, as there's millions and millions of kids who homeschool and do something other than, conventional high schools. So, most colleges, all colleges, everyone I've ever heard of, are very wide open for homeschoolers. They're welcoming to applicants from a homeschooling background. So for us, what we do, because we are on the sort of self-directed side, is that we help families, and this one of the things that would usually happen in the mentoring meetings that we have with young people is just like helping to document the kinds of stuff that they're doing. And so, for a lot of the colleges, a high school diploma is not the thing that they're looking for. Last I checked, Princeton University, for instance, doesn't require a high school diploma to go there. What they do care about is your transcripts. And it's just like, well, what have you been doing for the last 4 years that would, show us that you're ready for, what we're offering here. So what we typically would do is have kind of like a narrative transcript. And so we think of these We think of these like classes or courses that would go on a transcript as like a bucket, right? So it might be like the English freshman English bucket. And it can look very conventional. Like if a kid, like, just math, for instance, if they just wanted to like, I'm just going to work through this algebra textbook and we'll just put it on there that I did this kind of like standard kind of curriculum. You can certainly do that. But it can also be, just kind of a collection of things that are meaningful to you in this area, and then you can sort of document that. So, if we had a kid, like freshman English, it could be like some classes that happen at PLC. So it might be you're in the writer's workshop class, you might be in the story hour class, you might be in the, whatever these classes that we have that can go in the bucket, but you might just be reading some books that you're interested on your own. So you toss those in the bucket. Maybe you're part of the teen writers group at the local public library. You throw that in the bucket. You go see some shows, like Broadway or something like that. There's all this stuff. And then we would help young people and their families sort of document that. So it's like, this is how I studied English my freshman year. Read these books, I took these classes, I had these experiences, I did these things. And then ultimately, it depends on the college you're applying to. Like big ones that get like 60,000 applicants, they don't care what books you read. It's just like credits, GPA, SAT scores, like whatever. We're not gonna like read everything. But if you're applying to like a small liberal arts college, they're gonna care what books you read. And so, it's like listing them out. Like, here's how I, studied this. So, and then, obviously, some colleges require standardized tests from homeschoolers, even if they're test optional. Some, or don't require them. So it just depends on the particular, school that kids are applying to. And so we just deal with the specifics. So if they're like, I want to go to this place, it's like, well, let's find out what you need to go there, and then, support them with that.
Yeah, I love that. I talked to a lot of founders of elementary school micro schools like K to 5. Maybe they'll expand it to middle school
Mhm.
because
Right.
parents don't want their kids to leave and the kids are so happy there. So
Yeah.
they'll expand to middle school and then they're often worried about venturing into high school programs because it seems so daunting. And yet, I think what you're
Mhm.
showing is that you can leverage community resources, different, classes in the community, different
Mhm.
organizations, community college, dual enrollment offerings, and then be there to sort of coach high
Yeah.
schoolers into whatever path they decide to venture on after graduation or after
Yeah.
their high school years, so that it's
Mhm.
doable, right? To coach some high schoolers.
Extremely doable.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, two kind of related questions for you
Mhm.
in terms of who is coming to you. And the first question is sort of who are the students who are attracted to Princeton Learning Cooperative? Are
Mhm.
they homeschoolers? Are they coming from conventional classrooms? What is the draw for them to enroll? And then the second question,
Mhm.
and we can talk about it kind of after this, is sort of who's coming to you to be a founder of
Mhm.
one of these liberated learners, self-directed learning centers around the world. So let's start with kind of who's coming to you in your program, and then
Yeah.
who is interested in this model and wants to bring this to their community.
Yeah. Yeah. So the young people and families that we hear from at PLC, it's a wide range for like the particulars. But I would say that the sort of common theme through all of them is just young people and families looking for a more kind of flexible and more decision making and control over what their day-to-day life looks like. And so that plays out in a couple of different ways. So for instance, like we'll get kids who are like just super bright and bored to death in schools. It's just like, I'm really interested in learning about things, but it feels like my day is just like filling out worksheets and things that don't particularly interest me. And it feels like school is actually getting in the way of my learning. Um, and so, the flexibility of what we do is like great for them because it's just like, well, you can dive into whatever you want and like you can go as fast as you want and you can and have our support to like figure that out. So you have things like that. We'll have kids who just really don't like the social environment in schools. It can be pretty hard. So um, with other kids, but also sometimes just the physical environment. It's just too big, too crowded, too noisy, particularly if you have like sensory kind of things, sometimes that can be really hard. And they just need a more kind of smaller and sort of, human friendly kind of environment, comfy couches and things like that. Um, we'll get kids who have like really strong interests. It could be dance or new music or art or horseback riding, and they just feel like school plus homework just takes up all of their time and energy, and they don't have anything left for the things that really, that they love about life, and they just want to be able to prioritize those kinds of things. We'll get kids who like I just don't like all the rules and stuff in school. It's like, well, why should you be able to tell me to take off my hat, or like put my phone away or something? It's just like it's a little bit grating for them. So, there's just a whole range of people, but really anyone that's like, could use or benefit from that greater flexibility and control over, making decisions in their own life. I think is sort of the common thread through all of them.
And then is that also the common thread for the founders, the prospective founders coming to you that they want more control? They want to become founders.
Mhm.
Are they similar to you, many kind of former public school teachers looking to do school differently? What are you finding there?
Yeah. Well, one last point on the who's coming to us. So, I mean, we definitely have longtime homeschoolers who come to PLC, and it's great. It's wonderful. But the vast majority of kids we're working with are coming directly from public and private schools, and really wouldn't have considered, homeschooling or doing this unless a place like PLC existed. So a lot of the work that we're doing, which is really gratifying to me, um, is helping show young people and families that there's like a different way, right? I think a lot of young people, certainly when I was teaching, um, you just feel kind of stuck. It's like all they know is like, the high school in their town. And it's like if that's not helping or is actually getting in the way of what they want for their life, you don't think there's any other options. It's like, and so you just feel stuck. It's like, what are we supposed to do here? So being able to tell young people and families who otherwise would have no idea that you actually can opt out. There's this whole other world. It's like kind of like Harry Potter. It's like when he found out there was magic, it's like, yeah, you could come do this. And it's just like, what? So that's just really, really lovely. And I really enjoy that about my job. So yeah, so the founders that we hear, I think are pretty typical. The founders that you have on there, right? So a lot of them are former teachers or current teachers who have just run up against, similar, I think to me and whatever. It's just have run into the limits of the system that they're in, and don't really feel like the way that they want to have their day-to-day work be like is accommodated in that setting that they're in. And so, yeah, wanting to create a program that's more in line with how they sort of feel we should work with young people, and don't see um, the possibility of changing the system that they're in to a large enough degree to make that work. Like, yeah, like I, that's why I left. I didn't see any way to change a 12,000 person public school district that I used to work in
Hmm.
to where I to enough to where I felt like, I would feel comfortable continuing to work there. Now, that being said, my wife is still a teacher at the high school I was at. So it's not like it's a dogmatic, like, this is right for everybody, but it's kind of like kids, not everyone will come to PLC. Public schools and conventional schools are totally fine for lots of people, and they choose that. So great, you know. Um, but it's about having that option. It's about knowing that you can do something different, if that's what you're doing. So I think a lot of our founders are just like, yeah, like have a different idea about how you can work with young people, and want to make that a reality.
Yeah, so if some of my listeners and viewers are
Mm,
interested in what you're saying, and a lot of this resonates for them, and they say, "Wow, I would
mm,
absolutely love to open one of these self-directed learning centers for tweens
mm,
and teens through the Liberated Learners Network," they would
mm,
go to liberatedlearners.net.
mhm.
And what would the steps be for them? What is involved in becoming kind of a network member?
Yeah, sure. So we kind of have a couple different ways you could go into that. So the first thing we do like a monthly free webinar, I think every month. So you can just come and just kind of hear, and it's free. Just come and hear what it's sort of about and some of the basics of that. And then if you want more sort of personalized, attention, I think we offer, one-on-one consulting that you could, have an hour with one of us and, just kind of talk about what you're interested in and sort of get some feedback. The main thing that we do, for people who are like actively, so that's more like the exploratory sort of phase. But for people who are like, yep, this is, I want to start a program, I want to do like a self-directed education, program. We have what's called the starters program. And it's nice because it wasn't something that existed when we were trying to do the learning cooperatives. Um, as a teacher, I had zero business background, or I don't think I'd ever seen a budget. I don't know if I knew what that was. Just education. And so, and I think that's where, and I'm sure it's across all the networks and everybody who's trying to start these programs. I would say most of the people who are coming are doing so because they like working with kids. They want to do cool art projects with them. They just want to like, do these things. Whereas the back end, administrative and business side and financial side of things is I don't know. I don't know if I've come across anyone who's like super fired up about, budgets, for instance. Um, so the starter program is really just like crash course in, essentially like kind of business planning and organizational planning. So, there's like a planning document that people would get access to that kind of breaks down the main things that you need to think about when trying to run one of these programs. It's like, the mission and the vision, the team, the budget, marketing, outreach. There's all these things that you have to think about. It's the space, zoning, there's all these things. And so the program is pretty much just working with one of us to kind of go through that document, start making it's essentially you have like a small business plan when you're done. And then we would schedule calls to kind of go over each section, give our experience about, yeah, like we've tried this, maybe think about this, have questions asked. And at the end of that, you would have, essentially like a, skeleton of a business plan that you could then take, and open a center. So that's one part of it. And then, we have plenty of people who just like do that. And they're like, yeah, great, thank you. I'm just going to go. We don't own self-directed education, obviously. So people can just and there needs to be thousands of these places, so we would cheer people on happily. And then if people are interested, then there's a little application to officially become a member of Liberated Learners, which just has like ongoing kind of support and resources that we offer.
Yeah, and the membership piece, so some of these micro school accelerator
Mhm.
incubator programs either run sort of like franchises or licensing programs, or
Mhm.
they'll have sort of a revenue share model, all kinds of
Mhm.
different approaches. It sounds like yours is more just a membership opportunity. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that commitment.
Yeah, it's not a huge thing. So, it's like a short, small monthly fee basically just to cover the bare bones necessity, like having a Zoom account for the, like it's not a lot. Um, and so the kind of things that we offer is I'd say definitely more heavily weighted to the startup phase. The ongoing support is like, monthly calls that anyone can jump on and just kind of share, what we're doing, get feedback from other people. There's some resources and forms and things that people can use. And I think what we've found, and I've talked to some other people who've been like other, sort of networks and things. It's really hard to, I think, sustain that like really intense engagement, once things are up and running. It's like you worked all day, you're exhausted, you're a small business entrepreneur, you maybe have kids at home, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna get on a call on like Saturday morning or Thursday evening or something like that. And so I think it's kind of morphed more into kind of on-call sort of support. And so, as a member, just having somebody, maybe not a routine thing, but like, oh my gosh, this just happened at the center. What do we do? And then just, having someone with some experience that you can talk to. It's almost like having a lawyer on retainer, I think. You can
I
reach out
love
when you
that.
need them.
Yeah.
But it's, that's what we've kind of found over the years.
Yeah, and I think this is such a great model and something that could appeal to future founders who,
Mm,
don't want a huge financial commitment or kind of a revenue sharing model. This is low barriers to entry and ongoing support, and you still have all of that access to this wonderful community and network. So you don't have to recreate the wheel, and you have people to kind of
mm,
bounce off ideas and challenges with.
yeah.
Um, and you made the point, you want thousands of these programs,
Yeah.
and so do I. I hope that there's continued growth not only of liberated learner model programs, but
Mm,
innovative schools and spaces more
mhm,
generally. What is your
yeah.
thought on the future? What are you seeing in terms of interest in these liberated learners centers and the growth there? And then how does
Mm,
that fit into your perspective on the larger
yeah.
emerging schooling movement?
Yeah. Well, like you said, yeah, there should be a self-directed education center everywhere. Like it should just be one of the routine options that families have, wherever you go. Um, so, I think I'm not like a big systems policy thinker. I've been sucked into the bubble. Like when PLC started, my daughter was 9 months old. When Liberated Learners started, I think my son was either just born or being born. And then, being involved with the learning cooperatives has taken most of my time. Um, but what I see, I think, is that it's really, really challenging because a lot of these programs, there's not most of them are just under-resourced and understaffed, when they're starting, right? And so a lot of that stuff is right now it's pretty tentative. If you're a single person or a partner and you're opening one of these programs, it can be really touch and go. We've worked with lots of really competent, great people at Liberating Learners who have opened centers and then have closed them, right? Because it's like a little seed being planted, like when it's just a little sprout, like anything can happen really, and cause that to be to not work. And so, I think the things that I've seen, we had you on the call the other day, is that, you know, for it to really, really take off, I think there has to be some form of, public support for it. Obviously the people who are doing it privately right now are putting in tremendous amounts of effort and dedication and things like that, but it's challenging from a financial perspective. So, and things that make that a little, if every family is coming with some substantial amount of money, obviously that from our perspective, that would make things easier, from a financial standpoint. Um, so, I think that's probably part of it. I mean, the thing that I've seen, so when we started doing this in 2010, 2011, um, I think the conversations with families are a lot easier now, right? Because it was so foreign, almost 20 years ago. But the idea of doing something other than, kind of a typical conventional school is not so shocking anymore. A lot of people experienced it during COVID. I think the conversations I have with people about like, yeah, you could leave school and you could do this other thing and it'll work out fine. There's a lot less selling that you have to do because people have just more experience and more familiar with all of these options and they might know people who have maybe doing online stuff or doing like these, hybrids or doing, micro school, so that I think that part of it is just becoming easier, just because more people are familiar with the thing.
Oh, that's so great. I see that too.
Yeah.
I think there's a much greater openness to
Mhm.
alternatives to conventional schooling, and in fact, growing demand from many families for
Yeah.
something different, including
Mhm.
something different kind of right out of the gate. Younger
Yeah.
parents of younger children who are
Mhm.
just hitting school age looking for
Mhm.
something different than a conventional kindergarten classroom, for example. So,
Right.
so that's great. And also from a sort of practitioner perspective, great to see that more family. You don't have to sort of explain everything, maybe as in depth to kind of
Yeah.
these puzzled faces, but there's an actual understanding of, well, what does it mean to be a homeschooler or to choose something different? So that's really great. You
Yeah.
mentioned kind of public money. Of course, we talked about this as you mentioned on a
Mhm.
webinar I joined you on for Liberated Learners recently, and just the growth of school choice policies across the country, enabling a portion of state allocated education
Mhm.
funding to follow families to their preferred learning environment, including in some states homeschool
Mhm.
learning centers and microschools and various other alternative education programs. And
Yeah.
I think you're right that that can lead to the sort of financial sustainability of some of these programs and enable them to be successful from the start.
Yeah.
Yet you and Ken both run these North Star model or Liberated Learners centers in
Mhm.
states, Massachusetts and New Jersey, that don't have private
Mhm.
school choice programs. So it can be done. And it sounds like some
Yeah.
of the consulting and coaching you do with prospective founders is kind of how to find a way forward. Obviously, easier if you're in a state that has school choice programs that apply to these innovative models,
Mhm.
but not
Right.
impossible if you're in a
Right.
state without them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and are you seeing kind of increasing interest either in states with school choice programs or kind of nationally or globally? I guess what is the pace at the moment for you?
Yeah, I mean, we work with a couple people a year, I would say, who are like really interested in starting these. So like right now,
Yeah.
in our starter program, working with somebody in Florida, very interesting. I'm working with somebody in Zurich, Switzerland, which has been really fun. Um, yeah, and so I mean, it's not like I mean, we do Liberated Learners obviously for its entire existence has been very mostly volunteer and part-time kind of things for all the people, not just Ken and I, but like one of my colleagues in the Learning Cooperative, Allison Snikes was a big, founding member of that and has been just a huge, I don't know if you've run across Allison, but a big
Yes,
um
of course. She's
yeah.
great. Yeah.
And so it's not a huge flood of people that we're working with. Just, even if we had 20 people show up, it would be hard to to kind of do that with what we have available. But yeah, I'd say it's a steady, three, four, five, a year that we're working with to start centers and
That's great. Well, hopefully
yeah,
many more to come.
yeah.
Obviously, again, the website liberatedlearners.net if you're interested in
Mhm.
starting one of these programs in your own community. Tell us a
Yeah.
little bit more about how folks can reach out to you, Joel, with Princeton Learning Cooperative and find out what you have going on there.
Sure. Well, for Liberated Learner stuff, the easiest thing is just info at liberatedlearners.net. I would get that. Uh, and yeah, so anything specifically related to learning cooperatives, you could get me just at my name, Joel, Joel at princetonlearningcooperative.org.
Amazing. Well, I
Yeah.
just absolutely love all the work that you're doing. I hope more founders will consider opening self-directed learning centers and kind of embracing self-directed education as a philosophy that provides kind of
Mhm.
maximum freedom and autonomy to young people.
Yeah.
So, Joel Hammond, thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Yeah. Thank you.